The Classical Style by Charles Roson. Theories of Form.
The original meaning of sonata was played, and it gradually acquired a more specific sense. It's not a definite form like a minuet or a da capo aria.
The complexity of sonata form.
The line between the acquired and defining characteristics of a form is often blurred. Even composers of the period may not have been able to draw it with certainty. The traditional account of sonata form as a melodic structure is misleading. Haydn often used only one theme, while Mozart preferred an entirely new theme to mark the change to the dominant. A sonata is not built with a succession of themes as its structure. It's a feeling for proportion, direction, and texture rather than a pattern. Evolution of sonata form. In the 18th century, sonata form was defined by strict modulations and bridge passages. However, by the 19th century, tonality had become too fluid for this system. The first generation of Romantics tried to arrive at a thematic scheme for the sonata. Their success is evident in the sonata form as conceived after 1840. Beethoven and Mozart were the most influential composers in the evolution of sonata form. Their works were the most comfortable with the traditional theory of sonata form. The danger of the traditional theory of a sonata form is the normative one. It assumes that divergences from the pattern are irregularities. In conclusion, sonata form has undergone significant changes and adaptations over time. In the 20th century, the attitude towards sonata form changed to a more statistical approach. It's based on the common practice of 18th century composers. The importance of periodic phrasing. The importance of periodic phrasing and the primacy of the tonal over the thematic structure is accepted. However, the defect of this treatment is that it is too democratic. The style of any age is determined not only by what is done but by the prestige and influence of what is done. So, composers are not equal in the sight of posterity or even in the eyes of their own contemporaries. To understand the success of a work, we need to know what artistic purpose these standard procedures were expected to serve. For example, why did the composer choose one form over another? An account of the sonata in purely tonal terms does not falsify the way a classical sonata moves. But, it obscures the significance of the form, which must be considered inseparable from the form itself. The movement to the dominant was part of musical grammar, not an element of form. It was a necessary condition of intelligibility. Challenges with harmonic structure. The harmonic structure of music is generally unsatisfactory. Themes are seen as subsidiary decorations, and rhythm is given short shrift. Linear analysis is due to Heinrich Schenker. His theory works only for tonal music, and it fits Bach, Handel, Chopin, and Brahms better than the three great classical figures. The notes of a tonal composition have a significance beyond their immediate context. In Schenker's theory, every tonal work is a linear descent toward the tonic note. The cadence is the basic structural element in all Western music from the 12th century until the first quarter of the 20th. From the cadence grow the conceptions of the modes, tonality, the periodic phrase, and the sequence. Limitations of linear analysis. A key aspect of Schenkerian analysis is the long-range linear sense that transcends the immediate voice leading. This can be heard in the rising scale progression of Beethoven's Hammerklavier Sonata. However, there are questions about whether the linear skeleton is always the main principle of unity. There are other structural principles of unity, and they may be more fundamental in certain works. Furthermore, Schenker's disregard for audible facts can lead to a failure of critical decorum. For example, his cavalier treatment of rhythm can be problematic in analyzing works with contrasting rhythmic organizations. Schenker neglect historical development. Schenker's methods of analysis don't differ significantly for Bach, Mozart, Chopin, and Reger. But they don't work for non-tonal music or composers like Stravinsky. Tonality was not a frozen institution for 2 centuries. Understanding the historical development of tonality is crucial to analyzing music. The unity of thematic material in Beethoven's music was already appreciated during his lifetime. Motivic development is the fundamental principle of structure. As E.T.A. Hoffmann wrote, the intimate relationship among themes creates unity in music. Motivic development speaks from spirit to spirit. Thematic unity in music. Even lesser-known composers like Johann Christian Bach can achieve thematic unity. In Handel's Baroque suite, each dance begins with the same notes, showcasing a traditional form of thematic unity. Schumann's Carnival and Berlioz's Symphonie Fantastique are examples of works where each section is derived from the same motif. This technique was revived by the early Romantics with greater power and interest in cyclic form. Between 1750 and 1825, the use of a central motif may seem less evident, but it doesn't mean it had disappeared. In Beethoven's Appassionata Sonata, the second theme is a variant of the opening, making it an important part of the discourse. Thematic relationships in a work of Beethoven can sometimes be misunderstood. A newly introduced theme may not be intended to sound logically derived from what precedes it, but it fits naturally with the rest of the work. Motivic relationships. Motivic relationships have been one of the principal means of integration in Western music since the 15th century. A short motif can not only generate the melody but also determine its coloring and the course of what will follow. Take Beethoven's Sonata in B-flat major Op. 22, for example. The coherence of a work of art is not a modern ideal but the oldest commonplace of aesthetics, handed down from Aristotle through Aquinas. Motivic relationship has been a principal means of integration in Western music. Direct contrapuntal imitation is its most common form, but motivic development or diminution technique takes on even greater importance in the classical period, although by then it already has a long history behind it. This technique is used to create a sense of unity in a piece of music. But linear analysis neglects the direct unity. Linear analysis ignores form and details. Roson says above all we must avoid the ludicrous suggestion of a secret art. He points out that a common misconception is that composers wrote their music through an esoteric process like motivic development and arranged it into easily understandable forms like sonatas. However, this notion doesn't correspond to the psychology of any composer. Themes, modulations, and changes of texture are not superficial phenomena but are crucial elements of form that must be respected. When there is a relation between the details of a work and the larger structure, it must be made audible. The rigid linear dogmatism of contemporary theory is a cause of disquiet. Form cannot be generated by a linear series alone, as hearing is not exclusively linear. A central musical idea often binds together and unifies a late 18th century work, but it cannot be simply reduced to a linear form. We must account for the profound contemporary feeling for proportions and dramatic movement satisfied by the style.